Politicians should wear sponsor jackets like NASCAR drivers. Then we all know who owns them. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is campaign financing in light of the recent expose made by the New York Times. I want to quote a few bits and pieces from this particular article in question before we move on to our discussion tonight. And I quote from the New York Times article. With 10 days to go before polls open, around $3.7 million was distributed in checks, $678,000 to print campaign t-shirts and other promotional material, $297,000 to buy supporters gifts, including women's saris. Another $38,000 was paid to a popular Buddhist monk who was supporting Rajapaksa's electoral bid, while two checks totaling $1.7 million were delivered by volunteers to temple trees. Now tonight on our discussion, we are trying to find answers. How important is it for politicians and political parties to be transparent when it comes to campaign financing? And also, can international actors violate the territorial integrity, sovereignty of a nation and then finance individuals or even political parties? We're trying to find answers to these questions and more. We've invited four eminent personalities to the studio as usual. Joining us this evening are Mr. Kesarala Gunasekara. He's a former member of Parliament of the People's Alliance, also now a council member of the United People's Freedom Alliance as well in the Dehavel Mount Lebanon Municipal Council. All joining us tonight is Asoko Besekara, Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka. He's been very vocal about the Right to Information Act and the need to have a transparent system in Sri Lanka when it comes to campaign financing. Also joining us tonight is Shamindra Ferdinando, news editor of The Island, a journalist himself, joining us tonight on the show. All joining us tonight is Krishmal Varanasuriya. He is representing us tonight as a member of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, and he's going to make representations today at Face the Nation on behalf of the Bar Association of the country. Thank you very much, Krishma, for joining us this evening on the show tonight. So let's start off with Shamindra Ferdinando. Shamindra, we've heard this tagline, fake news, right throughout from the Trump administration about New York Times. And many individuals say that Trump's statement alone, the US President's statement alone, cannot be taken seriously, given the fact that he's been very vocal about almost every print media organization and also electronic media organizations in the United States. But my question is, New York Times, which has been in business for many, many years now, would they publish something fake? Because we heard President Mahinda Rajapaksa's statement, which says this is completely baseless. We've heard the Chinese embassy in Sri Lanka issuing a statement saying that they will not interfere with the territorial integrity or the sovereignty of any nation. They've not denied the fact that they've given money to the Rajapaksa administration during the campaign trail in the 2015 presidential poll. What's happening?
Shamir, the former president, issued a statement on Sunday. He denied ever receiving any funds from this particular Chinese company. But having said that, I must tell you that there's basis for this news story, right?
And what makes you say that?
Pardon?
What makes you say that?
You know, the story is based on information obtained from the government of Sri Lanka. And they had information as regards the funds released from the Standard Chartered Bank in Colombo. So the names are known. So there's no point in denying the story. The funds had been spent in Sri Lanka. But it's up to the government, I mean this government, to establish the persons who received the money.
Shamindra, this article is based on the recent investigations that are being carried out by the law enforcement authorities in Sri Lanka. Am I correct?
Yes.
Why is it that the people of this nation got to know about information of this sort from an outside party and not from internal sources?
Actually, Shamir, Gamini Vyangoda, I spoke to him and I saw a statement from him, and Gamini Vyangoda very clearly said that this government should explain to the people why it set on this investigation, because they had the information. For some reason, somebody in this government or the police decided not to proceed. So, in addition to inquiring into this report, whether the former president's campaign received money from the Chinese firm, they must also investigate why this government did not inquire into available information.
Shamindra, the topic itself, or the title of this story itself, says how China got Sri Lanka to cough up a port. Given your experience as a journalist and the exposes that you have made on the Rajapaksa administration and the relationship the Rajapaksa administration had with the Chinese government, do you think that something of this sort is possible for the Chinese government or a Chinese company to come and spend money on the Rajapaksa administration?
I must tell you, Shamir, that not only the Chinese, other foreign governments too have funded political parties, various other entities in this country. So those who are demanding an inquiry into the Chinese funding of the previous administration should also inquire into the funding made available by other powers to the Sri Lankan political system.
I want to again go back to this recent developments that has taken place in the New York Times and also in Sri Lanka. You hear many statements being made by many political forces or actors at present on this. But given your experience, Shamin, that I said before, do you think something of this sort would have been possible during the Rajapaksa administration? A port is being built. You don't know why a port is being built, one. You can't get ample revenue out of this. You know this was going at a loss and there was no other alternative than to go ahead and sell this port to the Chinese who built it itself. So my question is very simple. Do you think that the Rajapaksa administration may have accepted such a bribe prior to the 2015 presidential poll?
No, I cannot comment on that. What I can say is that there's an allegation, a report, New York Times report, so it's up to the government to investigate.
Thank you very much, Shamindra Ferdinand, the news editor of The Island. So Shamindra very clearly says that he has spoken to Mr. Vyangoda and he has categorically said that it's important to note that why this information was not available to Sri Lankans and why was this information that came about from an external party and not from an internal party. I want to move my attention now to Asoko Besekar, Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka. Asoko, when you read this article in question, what was your thinking? Do you think that something of this sort is possible? Now, Shamil just mentioned it's not about the Chinese alone. There were many other political parties and other forces internationally who sponsored such campaigns prior to the 2015 polls. And it is important to investigate all these actors who were involved. But the question is very simple. As an individual, as the Executive Director of Transparency International, what was your thinking as soon as you heard this news?
So, I tend to look at things a little technically as well. And so when I saw the allegation that was being made in the New York Times, immediately I thought to myself, okay, this allegation is about China Harbour Engineering Company and giving these sums of money. Immediately the two things that come to my mind are, is this a campaign donation, or could this actually be something which falls within the remit of the Bribery Act? Is this about getting sort of assistance in regard to a state contract? And that's an issue there. I mean, immediately when I think of it from the perspective of it being a campaign donation, we are in a lawless setup when it comes to campaign donations. You know, anything is fair game. It seems. You know, there's zero regulation on campaign finance. And I think there is an immediate need, I think not only through this, looking at what we've seen with perpetual treasuries, amongst other things, there is an immediate need to look at campaign finance and there's different steps that need to be taken. One, and I'm sure we can go into this in further detail, about what a preliminary step may be being about disclosing. So in the same way that people file asset declarations, there should be an open register of donations that you receive and in-kind benefits that you receive as well. So I mean, one thing is for someone to be, let's say, given a donation of 5 lakhs to their hands. The other thing is for, let's say, the printing costs of 5 lakhs to be given directly to the printer. Obviously, the numbers in this particular allegation are considerably higher. But I mean, that is an essential first step. From the perspective of whether there's an issue regarding the Bribery Act, then you have to look at whether the individuals involved actually fit within the framework of the bribery framework, which I can go into in greater detail if that's an area of interest. But I mean, that is obviously going to be something for Seabok to investigate into and to hold accountable. But when it comes to the campaign donation perspective, we have to separate what we feel is morally wrong. So this idea that a state-owned enterprise or controlled enterprise overseas is using money to actually for sort of electioneering and things like that. We have to separate that from what our rules say about campaign finance, which are, and we have no campaign finance rules. So, you know, separating the technical factor from what we think is moral or immoral is an important factor here.
Asoka, this article very clearly articulates that 2 checks totaling $1.7 million were delivered by volunteers to Temple Trees,
Yeah.
where President Mahinda Rajapaksa was residing at that time.
Yeah.
This is a big number. We're talking about $1.7 million, which equals approximately around 250 million Sri Lankan rupees.
Yeah.
Now, my question is, where was this money spent?
Well, now, it's difficult for me to speculate on how that money has been spent. I think it's understood by every other person in this country that when it comes to election time, money just goes at the drop of a hat. And obviously, let's face it, I mean, we have a completely and utterly financially illogical political system where people are spending 30 million, 40 million, 50 million rupees to get jobs which pay them 60,000 rupees a month. So, I mean, the logic, I mean, the fact that the fact that the entire system breeds this need for this nexus between politics and business, where private interest is. I mean, that is an accepted thing. But the fact that 250 million rupees has been delivered in 2 checks, I mean, it's a big number. It doesn't sound great, but if this is just a pure campaign donation, I don't see where the issue is, if it's a campaign donation. However, if this is about state contracts, trying to protect interests, trying to ensure that a particular corporate's interests continue to be prioritized, if the individual receiving the money is successful in the election, I mean, that opens up a complete different kettle of fish.
But the article itself opens doors to this aspect, where you just mentioned about accepting money as a bribe to open up a port in Hambantota.
Yeah, but I mean, it's, this idea of distinguishing campaign contributions from something irregular, then this is actually the exact need for public registers of what is a contribution. Because if someone is saying, look, I'm just making a bona fide, good faith contribution to someone, then they will have no problem in disclosing it and going public with it and recording it so that anyone can see.
Thank you very much, Asoka Besekar, Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka. I now move my attention to Krishmal Varansurya, representing the Bar Association of Sri Lanka. Krishmal, is this illegal? Accepting funds from an outside party, is this illegal?
Yeah. Shamir, firstly, thank you on behalf of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka and the Bar Council, its governing body, which I represent. Thanks for inviting us, because today my role is different and I represent the Bar. No, there's in so far as directly we don't have legislation or regulations dealing with campaign financing. So if something of this nature had occurred in terms of the law that we have now, there is no direct offence under any particular act. Of course, if it can be connected to some kickback or something that was returned to them under the bribery and normal penal laws, I'm sure there can be some action that can emanate. But I think representing the bar particularly, we need to take things in perspective, Shamil. Look, I do not know whether I look at this article in a completely different sense. One, I don't know whether this is another attempt, a feeble attempt by any particular regime present or even previous ones who have tried it to spin doctor some news for public consumption whilst the merry governing goes on in this country for a while, so that we are given some news to bite on for about 3-4 weeks. That can be one. Another one could be also, if you remember now, this has suddenly overtaken that earlier 118 or 108 list that was supposed to have taken money. 3 or 4 persons' names came out, and when the big names are about to come up, now suddenly we hear of some Chinese funding, right? So I do not know whether this is once again an attempt to hoodwink the public of the country who the bar represents, who we are concerned about, to not talk of those funds that have gone from perpetual to other individuals, to now talk of funding received by, just to say, well, not just us, the previous regime also have got funds, because like some of the speakers before me said, if that information was available all this time, why wait till now to come out with it? So if that is so, then that's spin doctoring. That's called spin doctoring, giving the public something via the media and allowing us to chew on it for another few weeks until they go on with the merry governing. So that's my immediate reaction to it. However, if you look at this New York, I haven't had a comprehensive read of it, Shamil, but just overtly looking at this New York Times article itself, we can't forget that the USA also has strategic interests globally. But if you look at some of the wording of this article, now I'm very quickly looking at it before I want to talk on campaign financing also. Now if you look at some of the wording on it, you think, during 2015 Sri Lankan elections, large payments from Chinese port construction funds flowed directly to campaign aides, activities of Mr. Rajapaksa, who had agreed to Chinese terms at every turn, and was seen as an important ally to China's efforts. Now this sounds to me more as a US interest speaking rather than an independent report. If you connect that to the next paragraph, though Chinese officials and analysts have insisted that China's interest in the Hambantota report is purely commercial, Sri Lankan officials said that from the start, the intelligence and all. Who are these Chinese officials? Who are these Sri Lankan officials? Why are they not named? They can say, no, China such and such department said this. Sri Lanka such and such department said this. I mean, that's how I would read an accurate article. This to me appears to be more a media spin with some sort of strategic interest in mind, which I would not like to cast too much of an importance on, because this looks to me more political than anything else. Also,
but this very
also finally, on campaign finance, because it's what we're discussing, I also agree this cries out a need for us to look at some regulation, because we are not going to get over this fact, Shamir. Every politician, I'm saying across the board, are funded by corporates and other individuals before election. They don't bring money from their grandfather at home to fund election campaigning, no. Someone pays them. Now we need to know who pays them how much, so that when they come to office, if there are kickbacks, if there are tenders given out of process, if there are procurements done out of line, then we know, this is why, because that corporate funded you, you're giving this. That is the crying need in this country, to regulate campaign finance like in several other democracies.
Krishpal, the content of this article is based on ongoing investigations in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Most of it. It says that...
do they quote a source? Can you direct me to what source they quote?
They say...
No source. So who's conducting the investigations? Someone at home, or in some NGO somewhere, or in an office somewhere, or a police authority, or a regulatory authority? Who are these officials? Who are these conducting it? They must say that. The Sri Lanka police on such and such a day has launched an investigation bearing number such and such of the crime book, and it is being conducted at the moment. You know, you can't make vague statements and then expect all of us to bite on this. There has to be some credible information. I am not saying that this is incorrect, but remember, as I said, the Thai, once they dig up that Kra Canal, the ship routes are going to be much more shorter via Hambantota. The US strategic interests in the Indian Ocean have always been there ever since the Voice of America days, right? So if that is so,
And if this is, and China is definitely going to gain by acquiring this harbour, Shamil, because now the ship routes have to come on a longer way. Once that Kra Canal is completed via in the middle of Thailand and it cuts across, it cuts several nautical miles closer to Hambantota, and we can gain a lot of good business. And China obviously saw an opportunity. If they actually funded to get the port, they saw good business opportunity and they got it. The sad part is that we have lost out on.
Thank you very much. Krishman Varasurya, member representing the Bar Association of Sri Lanka on the panel tonight. I now move my attention to Mr. Kesaralal Gunasekara, who is a former Member of Parliament of the United People's Freedom Alliance and also now Council Member of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party in the Devala Mountain Municipal Council. Mr. Gunasekara, when you look at these events that are transpiring now, you first of all heard about Sujiva Senasinghe, Dayasri Jayasekara accepting funds from perpetual treasuries. We also heard Field Marshal Sarath Fonseca saying that he received a sum of 100,000 rupees from perpetual treasuries. So we heard a few names. We heard the name of Ravi Karanaik at one point being given a bribe of an apartment complex in Colombo. We've heard a lot of things. The recent expose on the Mahinda Rajapaksa camp about accepting money from China Harbour company which constructed the port in Hambantota. My question to you is, how important is it to have a regulatory framework when it comes to campaign financing in Sri Lanka?
I think it's very important.
Because you are an individual yourself who have campaigned for an election. You were contesting under the preferential voting system. And you know the importance of having money for your campaigns. If I may ask you a question, were you funded by corporates? Were you funded by individuals? If so, did you disclose this to your electorate members or those who were giving or supporting your campaign trail at that time? Did this happen?
Of course, I have been helped by various people, but that doesn't mean, if I may put it this way, the maximum amount of money that I spent for election is less than 650,000 rupees. That's all that I spent. Because I don't believe in fancy spending. And maybe that's a result I don't get elected also.
My question to you was, my next question to you was that. So you were not even elected to Parliament the next time you contested, and you lost your seat, and we saw the manner in which you lost the recent council
local authority
elections as well. Is this because you did not have the funding?
No, I don't accept that. It's a different scenario.
Well, what's the scenario?
This particular election, it is always a case where the electorate in this country is not educated. It's a big problem in this country, 65 to 70% of the people who go and cast their vote are people who are not worried about getting a clean man, getting a good man into a position. They are only interested in, can this man do us a favor? Can this man help me out? Can this man get my child a job? That's how they look at it.
So are you saying that the voters are uneducated?
To some degree.
Or
you say to a greater degree.
Let's talk about the Devala Mountain Municipal Council election that recently concluded on the 10th of February. My question to you is, individuals like Dhanasari Amartunga, who was the mayoral candidate of the Poljana Peramuna at the election, also lost his seat.
Yeah, but that's by a very slender amount of votes.
In my case, lost.
Yeah, he lost. In my case, it's a serious problem because I have been in politics since 1979. I've won many elections, all right, and I got the highest number of preferences at all local authority elections. But this time, end up in the doldrums.
Do you think that international actors, may it be China, may it be India, may it be United States, may it be France, may it be any other country, can they interfere with the territorial integrity, the sovereignty of a nation, and start financing campaigns in the country? Can that happen? Is that ethical?
I don't think countries get involved in that respect. I don't think countries do get involved. But certainly certain organizations do get involved. Certain organizations do get involved. And that has happened in the past as well.
Based on the whim and fancy of respective governments?
Pardon?
Based on the whim and fancy of respective governments?
Maybe, to some degree. You got to understand that this story, it's something, there is an ongoing investigation, I feel. And that is how that lady has got this story. So the investigation has to move forward. As to whether that is going to move forward or not is a different question. Because it's very clear it has not moved forward. You know, it's not that difficult to get court assistance to ask the Standard Chartered Bank to give information. It's not a big issue. It's not a big issue. But the question here is, why hasn't it happened? Why? There has been an investigation, but it appears it has stalled.
China has been interfering in political affairs of many nations in the recent past. I can give you a classic example. The North Korean and the US president's meeting, where the North Korean leader was flown by a private jet sponsored by the Chinese government for him to travel to Singapore, and the most of the spending was done by the Chinese government on behalf of the North Korean leader. So you see Chinese involvement across the world when it comes to political discussions about the geopolitical standing of nations, so on and so forth. So do you think that this may have been possible?
With regard to your first question, Shamil, any major country would like to get involved in anything that is going on, with be it the US, China, Russia, even to some degree Germany, India. They certainly would like to get involved because something major is happening. They like to be involved in it, and that could be the reason. That's why many countries get involved.
We heard statements by the former president Mahinda Rajapaksa when he was defeated at the 2015 presidential elections. He said that my defeat was attributed to the raw intelligence involvement in the Sri Lankan political arena, and that is why President Maithripala Sirisena won. You heard statements like this coming from individuals like the former president himself.
At that point, I suppose maybe that statement, he thought it was. I don't think that is exactly what happened. The people in this country wanted him out. It's very simple. I mean, no foreign power got involved in any election activity.
So while the people of Sri Lanka wanted President Mahinda Rajapaksa out, there was external parties like China who wanted him in.
To some degree, maybe. To some degree, maybe. As to whether it is the Chinese government or a Chinese organization is a different story. You have to understand it, in this context, it is a Chinese organization.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kesara Gunasekara. I open the floor for questions from our journalist, Sonali Bangabat, who is a lawyer, as well as Nadim Majid, who is one of our senior news reporters at News First. But I want to pose a question to Krishma. Krishma, we've got a question from one of our viewers. He says he wants to not mention his name, but he says journalists are not required to divulge their sources in any article, so hence the article in question does not require to be quoted.
I disagree with that, whoever it is who asking the question. Journalists don't need to disclose articles, but journalists are also expected to be factually correct. Journalists can't just say some investigation has started, officials said, then they can at least quote the department. They don't need to quote which officer in that department.
No, but
they can. So I disagree. My answer to very simply, I disagree with that viewer. I disagree because I think that this is very shadowy the way it has been written. I've now read it. I have some more time to read it. I can quote several more instances as to why. I also did journalism in the University of Colombo. I'm telling that viewer as part of my BA. And A plus B equals C was what we were taught. Accuracy plus balance equals credibility. A plus B equals C. And I don't see any of that in this article.
No, I want to put the same question to Shamindra. Shamindra, most of your articles too that you've published over the years have not really quoted any particular source in question. I remember when you exposed about one of the issues with the President Mahinda Rajapaksa administration, one of the corrupt deals. When I called you to get some information, you told me, I still remember that day, you told me, Shamindra, I'm not in a position to divulge my sources.
What's the story?
This was on the helicopters that was purchased by the President Rajapaksa administration at one point. This was in the year 2011 or 12.
I cannot remember.
Let me see whether I can grab that article.
But I must tell you that I totally agree with Krishmal.
In which sense?
I mean, it's a very serious story, very serious story, that serious allegations have been made against the previous government, the government of Sri Lanka. So I think the writer should have at least given one quote, and I must also tell you that in 2016, when we pointed out that the US State Department announced, the US State Department announced that they have spent $585 million to restore democracy in Sri Lanka, Nigeria and Burma. Where was New York Times? Nobody wanted to take up the story. Nobody in this country, the civil society, the journalists, the government and even the former president's own party did not raise that issue. Just compare $7.6 million with $585 million spent in this country in 2015 to change the government, right?
I mean, in fact, I just add one more thing. I mean, if you look at the statement where they say 3.7 million was distributed in checks to print campaign t-shirts and other promotional material. So at US elections, they don't wear caps and t-shirts. You think the candidates bring them from home, those t-shirts and caps that have Trump and the party and all that, they are all funded. So I'm not finding fault with what is stated in the article. As Kesara said, if there is an investigation to be conducted, let's be forthright with it. If the information is available all this time, why not go to a court of law, get an order from the magistrate and go and inspect the bank accounts? But printing t-shirts and caps, US elections also have t-shirts and caps. Is the New York Times writing about that? Then let them write about that also. Well, who prints their caps and t-shirts then?
No, but the point is not about the credibility of New York Times, but the
no,
article
it's not.
itself.
That's what I'm saying.
It's
so
article
from
itself.
Answering your earlier question to that viewer, whoever it is who asked the question as to why I questioned this article, it's my prerogative to question this article based on what I believe to be an accurate statement. I do not consider this a balanced article. That's why I say A plus B equals C. Accuracy plus balance equals credibility. And I don't find this a credible article.
My next question is to Ashoka Bisekar. Ashoka, how important is it? You spoke about disclosure. Do you think, based on an article of this sort, action can be taken by the government or even CBOC for that matter?
Well, I think first and foremost, the one thing which I must say is at least something which the New York Times did. I mean, they've said in their article that Mr. Rajapaksa and his aides did not respond to multiple requests for comment made over several months for this article. So I mean, at least, and I think this is where one big area of concern is that in the media that we have got used to, many aspersions are cast without ever even trying to make any effort to contact the person that an article is being written about for response. So I think the fact that they have done that is a good thing. That said, I mean, I think this is not an isolated incident. And I mean, I think in our history, we have many, many instances of financial interventions for a whole host of different parties from outside entities. So I mean, this is just one example of a bigger issue. But I think one important thing to remember here is that the story here actually anchors in the details. It finally, the real thing that people are catching on to here are the numbers. The fact that 100 million rupees is spent on t-shirts, nearly 50 million rupees is spent on gifts for supporters, the 250 million rupees in checks. It's because of these numbers that everyone is now getting a little interested. And this is a very important thing which even our authorities handling anti-corruption investigations need to understand. The idea that there is some sort of information which comes out regarding the numbers it ensures that the public are also more invested and interested and bought into what's going on these investigations. Now, I can understand that sometimes some of these numbers and everything else people will say, well, you know what, we can't disclose that because that will jeopardize the investigation. And at times that may be correct. But in other instances, you need to ensure that the public also knows that there is momentum. And the issue is that this entire anti-corruption discussion in the country has completely collapsed because no one has any faith that there's any momentum in any of these areas. The other point that I'll just quickly make is that, very quickly, is that this idea of the moral argument, of this is bad, so, President Rajapaksa has done something which is morally wrong. We should just try, and it's difficult, but we should cut away from the moral argument, because the moral argument in all different angles, no matter which political angle you take, you will have a different moral argument to make, and it will inevitably be very frustrating, because morality is not going to be the final route in truly holding someone to account. It needs to be done technically, so that's why we need campaign finance, disclosure, all of these sorts of things to ensure that we can truly address all of these issues.
Sonal and Nadim, it's all yours.
Shami, one aspect.
Yes, yes.
With regard to that $38,000,
Yeah.
there was a question put to a particular priest. Some time back I was told, and he had replied that a certain foreign organization gave him money.
So it's confirmed.
I saw it in one of the news items.
Well, he said that the money was used to develop the temple.
Yeah, but the question here is that he accepted that he received that money. That is the issue.
The thing is this, I don't want to get into
I also do not
defending
want
the
to.
credibility of the New York Times or Fox News or of RT.com or of Xinhua News. Each publication, each platform will have their own angle, let's say, on what it is that they're reporting. But when you're talking about the numbers, when you're talking about overseas agents, whether they're American or whether they're Indian, as President Mahinda Rajapaksa, as former President Mahinda Rajapaksa claimed following his election defeat, or whether they're Chinese, Mr. Varnasuri, I'll pose this question to you. Don't you think that it reflects a serious shortcoming in our laws that overseas agents are able to influence our elections in this way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Jamil and Nadeem, this is not the first occasion that this has happened, no. We know there have been consistent backlashes by a losing side at an election, saying that it is an international conspiracy, such and such people helped them to come to power, such and such people gave them funds. And if you look at it historically, you must look at these two main political streams. China has always been a close ally of this leftist-led coalition governments ever since the Rice Rubber Pact of Madam Sriba Bandaranaike as Prime Minister. You follow? When
Similarly, the US has been more supportive
a close
of
ally
the
of the
liberal
capitalist
free trade, free market,
free market. So this will always continue, and it doesn't have to be direct influence also, no, via other means, via funding of other ventures or non-governmental activity that can also come in. So there are definitely foreign interests at play, and let's not forget Sri Lanka has been, as it is over as we were Serendip and Taprobana, we have been of interest to several foreign nationals, the West and the East, for strategic geopolitical reasons. However much we try to underplay it, we are geopolitically situated in an extremely strategic location and close to India, and that's why if you look at most of these comments, they are commenting Indians. And obviously you can see the resentment, the old rivalry between India and China coming out in this article. So one must give an educated reading to this. That's what I'm trying to say. Let's not take that face value and the monetary values involved. Have an educated reading of this article. And also just look at this comment, Nadeem. But in 2009, the president had grown impatient. His 65th birthday was approaching. And to mark the occasion, he wanted a grand opening in Hambantota. Who's saying all this? Did the president say my birthday was coming and therefore I wanted to open Hambantota? So I mean, you have to look at it academically, have an academic reading of this article, and then critique it in terms of journalism. You follow? That's what we need to do. So we have to keep in mind there are geopolitical interests in our island nation. It has been so ever since the Silk Route days, and it continues to be so. Particularly after, as I said, once the Kra Canal opens up, all the shipping routes will have save about 2.5 days going via Hambantota, and this is going to be a gold mine for China.
Is the need of the hour critiquing the reporting of the New York Times of
Absolutely
any other
not.
thing, or is it to strengthen our own institutions?
This
our
we have to now, once again I say, because I represent the Bar Council, we have to now use this opportunity, and we, particularly the legal fraternity, now must get around and cry out for the need, together with you all and media stations, cry out for a need for regulations on campaign financing. A couple of years back, when the US government invited us on their IVLP program, we went to the US State Department. In that, the Attorney General's office has a separate arm, the US AG's office has a separate arm to go behind campaign finance. They monitor it. Every elector's campaign finance is monitored. And if there are subsequent kickbacks, or if the monies have not been spent in the manner they have disclosed, then they go after them.
Asoka, I'd like to pose this question to you, and in the interests of full disclosure, since we are talking about the importance of disclosure, I'm also a consultant and I work closely with Transparency International, so I know that you've been doing some work on campaign finance and on asset declarations as well. Now you, over the course of some time, through the asset declaration law, obtained the asset declarations of over 100 MPs in Parliament, but you're not allowed to divulge it because of a gag order in the existing law. Now, this is one of the things that the Yahapanya government pledged to change. Introducing campaign finance regulations, we saw the President this year saying again that he's committed to it. But this sort of commitment has not really translated into results. Where are the results when it comes to campaign finance disclosure, at least, and limitation, and when it comes to public access to asset declarations?
I mean, I think the inaction on this and the inaction in this area is quite startling. And I think one thing to realize is that reforming some of these areas, I think many people who have the best interests in serving the country, in getting elected, they realize that this issue of money is something which is incredibly difficult. And it's amazing because actually, when you think about the way in which our country has developed through its different experiences of elections and everything else, arguably right now is the time with the most number of financial elites in Parliament. You know, people look back at our history and think that, it was a whole load of elites back then. Now you have to be a financial elite or have a very, very close connection with business that can pump money in. So what we see right now, I mean, it is startling. But the one thing is this, once you have won and once you know how to win within this system, there are massive barriers to entry for other people. Because it's impossibly difficult to get the money and everything in place to win. So once you're inside the system, the desire to know how to the desire to reform it, the desire to make it easier for people to understand financial interests and all these things, extremely difficult. I am telling you, looking at some of those asset disclosures as well, and I have the asset disclosures from 2015, at a time when many people, I think, were a little bit scared, thinking in 2015, I better properly fill this out because I don't know how to what level of sort of enforcement is going to be taking place. When you look at the nature of those disclosures, it is a game changer if they're in the public's hands. And why is it that no one wants those in the public hands? Because so many different interests can also can also be seen there. I'm not saying that there's illegality or anything like that. It's just that it helps the public better understand their elected officials and the interests that they serve. I mean, that's it. And ultimately, we have a government. One big thing that they've done is passing the Right to Information Act. Enormous, big step forward. But in this open government environment, how can anyone say that giving the public less information will make them better informed? As Kesarlal said, you know, it's important that the public have more information to make better educated voter choices and everything else. How can keeping information about campaign finance and asset disclosure opaque and hidden, how can that ever serve in the public interest?
Asoka, my first question is to you as well. Now, the conduct of free and fair elections is a basic tenet of democracy. However, the unregulated use of finance can completely blur this, potentially facilitating money laundering, undue influence and illegal activity. Now, with zero regulation on election finance, you earlier said in your opening remarks that at least we need to have this concept of an open register for disclosure of donations and in-kind benefits, right? So at the end of the day, we're looking at a situation where everyone's trying to champion this cause, but nothing is going to happen unless there's political will to effect this. Right. So my question to you is, and before I ask you the exact question, I'll just read out this paragraph. This is from these are the laws prevailing in the UK. It says legislation to prevent excessive spending by electoral candidates in the UK has been in place since the Corrupt and Illegal Practices Prevention Act as far back as 1883. The current law regarding campaign financing in the UK is contained in the Representation of the People Act 1983, the Political Parties, Elections and Referendums Act of 2000 and the Political Parties and Elections Act 2009. So, I mean, we have quite a few antiquated British laws here as well. But why are we avoiding or omitting this? And what can be done to bring forth this urgent need?
Yeah, I mean, it's important, and I mean to ensure that this message keeps going out, and that's why even on a program like this or through the media and other things, it's important that this issue of campaign finance is continuously highlighted. I would say though that looking at the UK legislation, there may be certain interesting factors there, but I think we don't need to look overseas. Domestically, we can now see the need. The domestic need right now and the need for campaign finance legislation is not coming from looking at what happens overseas and thinking, my goodness, wouldn't that be good here? This comes from very much, you know, trying to build public trust in...
we saw the manner in which there was a lot of activism for the RTI Act by looking at India, our neighboring India.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of grassroots level activation when it came to the RTI. So we need benchmarks. We need to look around us, and generally countries have legislation, regulation when it comes to election campaign finance.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the thing. I mean, whereas let's say with RTI, we were the last mover in South Asia, campaign finance is an enormous issue across, even amongst our neighboring countries as well. So I mean, it's not like we are lagging behind, but I think we have the opportunity of actually being at the forefront of showing the rest of South Asia that this is a crying need at the moment. Sure. And the thing is this, if you are against campaign finance regulation and disclosure, you are basically for just ensuring a financial elite continue running this country. Because, I mean, don't be misguided by the way someone communicates and the way someone may dress or anything. Be guided by the vehicles that they're driving in. You know, that, I mean, this is what protects financial elites within our political system.
Do you agree with the statement made by Ashok about...
Pardon?
Do you agree with Ashoka when he says about the elitists only campaigning and then they are the only ones who are spending money in this political...
of course that is happening.
For at this time.
Of course that is happening. That is happening. I mean, I would not use the term elite, financial. These are crooks.
That's a better word there.
That's a better
Elite
word.
crooks.
Financial crooks.
Mr. Varnasurya, now...
May I add something? May
Sure.
I add something? Now, I have been in this business since the 70s, and I fundamentally feel this particular election, this local authority election, was a very good election, where campaign financing was at a very, very low level. The reason is very simple: change of the election procedure system. Because everybody realized that whatever you spend, you have to ask a vote for the party, not for yourself.
But Mr. Gunasekara, didn't the change in the election procedure sort of contribute to your loss as well? Because you had to seek from a single constituency. Do you feel that you would have gotten more preferential votes if you had access to campaign in the entire...
No. In this situation, the voting pattern was totally different. No, there was a different reason as to why people from our own party went and voted for somebody else. That is the reason. But what I say is, if you take the entire country, there was less money spent on election activity. Very less money spent. Now in our area, there were hardly posters. No, if any local authority election there, you get so many posters. No, you hardly saw a poster. Why? Because they realize carrying their photo and everything is not going to help them, because they have to ask the vote for the party. The ballot says the party, not anybody else.
Shamindra, I want to pose this question to you. Now, we are talking about geopolitical influences, and this is a reality around the world. We saw this happening in the Ukraine with the Russians and the Western world, sort of that tug of war, and what happened in Ukraine. We've seen this throughout in the Middle East. Powerful countries always use tools like this to assure their own interests, to safeguard their own self-interest. Whether those powerful countries are capitalist or socialist, whether they are from the whether they are the US or the Russia or China, or even other countries with more soft power. Now, unfortunately for countries with less power like ourselves, it seems to be our fate to be left to the whims and fancies of these powerful countries. Now, one of the ways in which we can safeguard against that is something you highlighted previously on Face the Nation as well, is that you need to ensure that our systems are strong and functioning, that we need to have strong institutions in the country. What is preventing this from happening? Because you get all these people, politicians on both sides, who talk about sovereignty and territorial integrity and etc., who have absolutely no qualms whatsoever when it comes to taking millions of dollars in funding from overseas agents, regardless of who those overseas agents are.
Now, see, now we are talking today. Now, you invited us today to discuss this issue, the US revelation that $7.6 million worth, right? But why did not you, the other media, except the island, of course, raise the issue of the US funding this amount? Over 100 million US dollars on several locations. The civil society did not say a word, the NGOs did not say a word, the political parties did not go and complain to the FCID or the CID. Why? Even after I mentioned the US funding right here, there was no interest, right? So people want to a section on the media, they'll go after the Chinese funding but not the US. Why? Because you just look around. You see the civil society, you see the NGOs, the millions spent.
No, but I disagree with you on that statement, because when this issue came up with regard to campaign financing, there were many electronic media organizations which did not even touch upon
just show me one instance the media raised the US funding issue.
The US funding issue, I agree with you, but there were many instances in which...
that's true.
Many instances in which, when this issue cropped up, the first day itself, many electronic media organizations, apart from Newsfirst, spoke on this matter.
This matter. That is my point.
That's his argument.
My argument is, why all this interest only on this? That the US funding, I mean the US announced, it's not a newspaper report, the US State Department declared that it spent $585 million in Nigeria, Sri Lanka and Burma. Why no interest? The parliament did not say a word on it. President Rajapaksa didn't say anything on it. Nobody. The media.
And why is that?
No, it's a very interesting situation. The civil society, just if you go through this, I'm sure you are aware, the funding made to various organizations in this country. Right? There were 3 organizations.
When you say I'm aware, I hope you're not saying I quit.
No, definitely not.
I don't
over 600 million Sri Lankan rupees received by 3 organizations between 2007, 7, 8 and 10. So a lot of money. So people will
That in
take
NGOs, no?
NGOs, yes. So I think in a way, Shamir, these people want these problems to continue also, otherwise they cannot intervene in this country.
But Kesar, I have a counter argument to this. I'm sorry, may I just add it?
Yes, please.
When we say NGO,
Yeah.
it's a non-government organization, no?
Yeah.
Now for all these politicians to play merry devil with our money,
Yeah.
they use our money, our tax money,
Yeah.
government money. So they are government organizations. Actually, government and organizations are not working for the people, they are working for themselves. Playing merry politics in the 5 years that they are there to make sure that them and their kith and kin can come to all political office. So how else would people like Asif, Asoka, Yumi, Shamir and Sonali and Nadeem wanted to put up an organization and go battle it out, fight it out? Who's going to fund us? Because we are not governmental. We are non-governmental. I don't receive any money from, just to clarify,
Correct,
I don't receive any money from anyone. But what I'm trying to say is, those people also must be funded, no case.
Yeah, yeah.
So
They
it's like
must
this.
also get some funding or something to do something.
No, it's like this. Now,
Otherwise, where do they bring money from?
I totally agree with you, but I must add, when people fund, the people who receive the funding have to carry out their orders.
And no,
And to
they
meet the
can
objectives.
disclose
Not
it.
necessarily.
They can disclose it. They
Now,
can
see,
disclose
some
it.
degree maybe.
Now, as an example,
Yeah.
until the war was brought to an end, there were organizations in this country which received millions of dollars, right? The whole, they had to propagate the lie that the LTT could not be divided.
So, Shamin,
On a daily basis.
then you must make that whole statement. Just receiving millions of rupees is in itself is no problem if they are doing a mandated job that they are supposed to be doing in terms of the articles. But if they are going beyond their mandate, or if, as you said, they
What is their mandate?
So you have to look at
No.
So we can't.
I must
generalize.
tell you.
No, we can't.
No,
generalize. For
no,
example,
please.
Can we?
I must tell you.
Yeah.
I must tell you. Their mandate was to show the world, to tell this country that the LTT.
So when you say there, you must name
them.
them. Who? Now, for example, can we say Dr. A.T.A. Ratna, the longest surviving NGO in this country, Sarvodaya? Can we say he's holding a candle by anyone and going and propagating LTT propaganda? He's not. But they also get funds from all over the world to do their child care projects and their teen mothers projects and teen pregnancy projects. So they also get money. So we can't across the board say NGOs getting money is wrong. I disagree with that. Because similar to counter governments, particularly corrupt regimes, the civil society must also activate themselves. And like I've said several times, my grandfather hasn't left some millions to go out and work for society. Someone must help us. So, but as long as it's accounted for and you work on your mandate, that I don't see any problem with that.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We need to go for a quick commercial break, but very quickly, Shamindra, you were not referring to the work carried out by Asoka's
No, definitely not.
transmission pressure. We're now going for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's Face the Nation. We're talking about campaign financing, all this and more after a short commercial break. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation.